Hi, small update. The stretching is going really well with my neck. I have to do it quite a bit. I might spend half an hour stretching in the morning and probably the same in the evening, but it seems to be helping a ton. It's not like a fix-all, cure-all type thing, but it's definitely, along with doing two chiropractic adjustments a week now, and I'm still doing some rhythm stuff from the chiropractor. We're seeing a lot of progress, and my muscles seem to be healing from working out, which has been one of my biggest issues in recovery. If I would exercise, the muscle wouldn't heal, or it would heal so slow that it basically wasn't healing, so I was just getting weaker because you're creating bigger inroads. So overtraining was almost inevitable. It was impossible not to overtrain because any training was overtraining. And now I'm able to do some stuff, and the muscles seem to be recovering a little bit, which is awesome. So I've been doing a lot of that, which I've been able to multitask a little bit. I have this little hammer, it's like a 3 4 pound hammer here, and I hold this off to my side, and I all I have to do is go like this, and I get a really good stretch on my right side here throughout all of it. So I can work that side and really stretch it out just while I'm teaching online. Actually, in between classes, got a couple of minutes to stretch, so that helps. Seems to help a lot. It's not an immediate fix. There almost seems to be like a day delay. Like I don't feel better from the stretching on the day that I'm doing it. I feel better the next day from stretching today. So I have to keep up with that every day for sure. The one day I stretched for like a half an hour the whole day, and the next day I didn't feel as good, so I went back to stretching more. And I'm happy with that. So if my muscles are recovering and I'm getting stronger, we're definitely doing something right. For teaching, I found that I've really been pushing the phonics stuff, and I've found that even most of the advanced students, they haven't learned through phonics, so they don't know the phonics sounds, right? Abacada, effaga, like they don't know what that is. You can show them an A, and they know A and B, C. They learn how to sing it, A, B, C, D. They learn the song, but they don't learn the sounds, abacada, and they don't learn cha, sha, th. So they're trying to remember all these words instead of sounding out t, oo, th. They're just looking at a word like tooth, and they're just trying to memorize it, and they're trying to memorize every word they see. They can't decode, they can't decipher anything. And Mandarin is a completely different concept of language, right? They're a logographic writing language. English is a phonographic one, so they do in Mandarin. I think this is part of why 100 million people in China can't read, because you just have to remember this goes with this word, this one goes with this word, this one goes with this word. So that is a huge memory task. But in English, you just have to, I mean, English is complex, right? But you have to memorize all these little pieces that make up the sounds. It's a phonographic language. And then spoken, they're also completely different concepts. Mandarin is tonal, English is, I don't know, whatever most European languages are, but it's not a tonal language. I would consider it normal, but I don't know what the proper name is for a non-tonal language. Anyways, right? English is really complex to a certain extent too, because it's a merging of a Romanic language like Italian, French, Spanish, Portuguese, Romanian, and a Germanic language like German, Dutch, Danish. The closest other language, closest living language to English is Dutch. It's kind of crazy how close some of the phrases are, right? Like, I think dat water is good means that water is good. It just sounds like the super strong accent. In a version of Dutch, which is called Frisian, right? I think there's three main areas of the Netherlands, if I remember correctly: Zeeland, Holland, and Friesland. Friesland is the northernmost part, and they have their own dialect of Dutch up there called Friesisch. I'm not sure exactly, but something like that. And that Frisian must be called Frisian, and that's actually the closest language to English, but overall Dutch. And because English has formed between the Germanic and the Romanic languages, it's different than both. And it carries a lot of the history, a lot of the etymology of the language. So stuff does not always sound out correctly. Now, they estimate there's about 1 million words in English. It's debated, so it's like give or take 250,000, which is ridiculous. And they estimate that 85% of it you can sound out. Seems to me it'd be a little less than that. Maybe 80% of it you can sound out, and maybe 20% doesn't quite follow all the rules unless you include a lot of rules. But still, it's the basis of learning the language. And they found every study that's ever been done on reading and learning reading in English has shown that the more systematized phonics program you follow, the better. Systematic phonics is the best by far. Embedded phonics, where you're like reading along when you encounter words, you just sound them out and you kind of do phonics that way, is the next best. And the worst by far is whole language learning, whole language programs, which are horrible. To even get them to work, they kind of have to incorporate some phonics, right? Uh, Anyways, for second language learning, you have to do more than phonics because they're also trying to just learn words. Naturally, we pick up words from the environment we're in, people talking, and you can kind of replicate that with kids if you have them like watch American television and American movies or just anything in English. I guess if you want to learn a British or Australian accent, you could watch that stuff. And that'll kind of help do the comprehension method on its own. But explicitly, you want to learn the definitions of the words. So it would work really well to do ostensive definitions, right? Like take a picture of a variety of stuff, like in a bedroom. Drawings work well because there's not quite so much detail, but pictures will work good too. And you go through, and I do this with students, and you look at this thing and ask, do they know what the name of this is? And either they do and they say it, or they're close, or and you teach them the name, and that's giving them an ostensive definition, the closest thing you can get, right? If I pick this up and I say pen, that's an ostensive definition to point it out specifically. You can do that with pictures on the internet so easily. And then you can kind of incorporate the comprehension approach and definitions by me reading to them. I could either just have a book where I pull up where they follow along and I'm reading, or I could also have where I'm reading, but then when I encounter harder words, maybe unusual words, something like that, I sound them out and then I go over the definition. You're kind of incorporating a lot of it together, embedded phonics with the comprehension method, with ostensive definitions or just explicit definitions in general, and possibly go through television shows or movies explaining some of the words we encounter throughout so they understand what's happening. And I offered the company, one of the companies I worked through, I offered to start working on developing a video program doing all of that for them. And the woman who runs the company, I believe she owns the company, or at least a major part of it, I'm not sure how many investors and stuff she has, she said, well, aren't there already language learning programs on the internet? We can just use those videos. And it was weird. I mean, it was a longer conversation, but I said, aren't there other language schools on the internet? So why does your company need to exist? And she had no answer at all. She never thought about it, apparently. I don't know. That was a handful of days ago. That's kind of where we ended that conversation. I haven't heard from her since. She said she would have to think about it. I presume she's still thinking about it. But I decided to kind of do it on my own. I need to shoot some of the phonics videos for my students anyways, so I did that. I shot a 23-minute video where I pontificated too much on this type of stuff, and then I also made it too big. 23 minutes means it's more than 100 megabytes when I'm shooting my screen and everything, so I had to compress it to send to the students, which means they have to unzip it. It's kind of a pain in the butt. But YouTube is blocked in China like half of all websites or something ridiculous. Like most websites, most useful, good websites are blocked in China. So someone in China has to come up with a version of the same thing. So they have something called Yoku, which is just a copy. There's something else that I can't pronounce that starts with an IGY, Iggy something. There's a website that's basically a copy of YouTube. So they have all their own things, but it's only available in Mandarin, but Google Chrome Translator works pretty good. So I might set up accounts on there so that I can upload my videos and basically start constructing English as a second language course like I wanted to do through the company, but it's going to be a little bit for free just for the students I specifically have for that company. I can send anyone I want to that channel, to that link, and maybe, maybe that'll lead to something else like developing a course, or maybe I'll see if I get a lot of views and just kind of see where that goes. But I'm going to play in that direction a little bit. And then writing. I'm entering the X Prize writing contest, which I have to do a lot of writing on today. And I've noticed a few things resistance-wise in my writing. One is when I'm writing for a writing prompt, like this is, right? So you're flying from Tokyo back to San Francisco on like a business trip or something. They give you this little prompt, and you hit some turbulence, and it jumps you from 2017 to 2037. You land in San Francisco, but you're 20 years in the future, and now you have to tell a 2,000 to 4,000 word story, so fairly short, about how technology is positively impacting society. All right, now that is more constraining than it sounds because you'll notice most things set in the future are dystopias, not a ton of utopias. There's like a couple, and usually the utopias are contained within some sort of dystopia or something. Dystopias are way more popular. It's hard to write stories where everything's like happy-go-lucky, technology is a good thing. It's a lot easier to write a story where technology has gone horribly wrong, and that's more interesting and what people want to read, and it's more interesting for me. So there's some decent amount of constraints, but I've written like 3 blog posts, I think, up to this point. I'm working on the 4th of working on ideas, coming up with ideas, how I could do it. And I've come up with some great stuff, turning San Francisco into an artificial war zone, which are fought with droid clones by people that are somewhere else, like live in a vat or something like the Matrix. So basically, death and disease have been eliminated, and war has been eliminated, and you have these great healing technologies for the droid clones. You can really showcase a lot of interesting technology, but it's super intense, right? You appear in 2037 inside of a war zone. The plane obviously gets shot down, guys obviously injured, and a lot of stuff goes crazy. So it should be a pretty interesting idea. But just writing within constraints, I find a lot of resistance because I'm like, I got to keep it within these guidelines, and then I kind of like lock up. Also, as I'm getting more energetic and healthier in general, right? Which we'll see how that goes. I got to manage expectations. Manage expectations is huge. Tend to get too optimistic. Optimism not a good thing. And I've talked about that before, but I don't feel like writing as much, right? Like my writing urges really came alive as I've been unhealthy and I've been sick. And I've heard this from a lot of writers, right? Like George R. R. Martin lived inside of a couple of blocks in New Jersey growing up, and he wanted to get outside of it, but he couldn't. So he started reading, and then he started writing. And it was really just because he was constrained, because he was limited. And I think I kind of started doing the same thing. I read a lot of stories when I was young because I wanted to go other places and couldn't necessarily. So I read a lot of stories, got satisfaction that way. Then when I could go other places and do exploring, do all this other stuff, I switched almost completely over to nonfiction for years. Right? I was kind of always reading some fiction, but very slowly, mostly nonfiction. And then when I became more constrained again, now I had some health issues. I couldn't read all the time. I couldn't focus. I couldn't remember things. I couldn't do everything. But even with that, I still delved more into television shows than I ever had, which are all stories, right? They're just easier to consume, and if you miss stuff, it's no big deal, whatever. So I delved back into stories as my limits, as my constraints increased, as my restraints increased. And now that I'm feeling a little bit healthier, I feel a strong urge to go do any of these things. Go to California to the computer school. Go to France to tutor English. Go to China to teach at a school in English. Go do all these things, right? I feel like going for a really intense hike. But all those, I believe, would be bad decisions. Now I feel an urge to go do them. And I've done a lot of my urges, things I felt like doing in my past, and it hasn't worked out well, right? So I think my decision-making ability is maladapted to my context, to my environment, and maladapted animals die. So I'm trying to change my decision-making pattern a little bit, but it's difficult. And I know going for an intense hike would be a horrible thing. It'd probably mess me up for days, if not longer. I know that going to the computer programming school in California is an awesome opportunity, but it probably wouldn't work out. I can't work that hard for that long and be that just I don't have the capacity for it. Going to a school in China would probably not work out well because you're trying to adapt to a completely new environment. If I have health issues, right, and one thing, I can't get away from this chiropractor in West Michigan because she's what I've had working so far. I'm glad I have some self-efficacy with all the stretching and whatnot, but I need to stay close to her for those adjustments. And so same issue with going to France. So all these things that I feel like doing as I get healthier, I can't do. And then so I feel less constrained as I get healthier, and I feel less of an urge to write. So it's interesting because I also feel the limits and the constraints since I can't do that stuff. I'm deciding not to do that stuff. And it's a weird mix between feeling constrained and feeling freed up from constraints. And I mean, same thing with the University of London. I have a great opportunity to do the schooling through there for a pretty cheap price. I mean, probably $2,000 for the next 3 years each, right? So 2, 4, 6. I mean, that's extremely cheap, and that would be a full bachelor's degree in it. They obviously kind of liked my essays. The one essay I did for the Intro to Philosophy class to try it out this year, I put philosophical concepts into stories to make them easier to digest and more comprehensible, which is what I wanted to do. And I thought academia would hate it. I thought they were gonna just kind of throw that thing away, maybe at a minimum give me like a D or something. And they didn't. They gave me a B, which isn't horrible, isn't amazing, but it was a weird concept, and I expected it to come back as worse because I didn't think they would like me putting philosophical concepts into stories the way I did. And it's not like a story you can revise, right? It's a one draft. They give you a pencil and a piece of paper and a question, and then you just start going. So there is no like first draft and then redo some part, edit it. No, it's just a one-off thing. So it wasn't like super amazing or anything. So I'm pretty happy with the B. But that's another opportunity that I think I mean, my money's just trash. It's horrible. So an opportunity I really can't pursue. And even if I had more money, it still probably wouldn't edge its way up to the priority list because I have tons of debt that I'm trying to work off for the medical debt and my car. It's probably not even legal to run with the muffler being ripped off and some of the stuff falling off it, breaking. Like I don't know how much longer it's going to go. So it probably wouldn't even edge its way up into the top of the priorities, even if a couple $1,000s accidentally fell from the sky and landed in my lap. So I have major limits and restraints and constraints, but as I felt more energetic and stronger and healthier, right, it's not a ton, it's just a little bit more, I felt less of an urge to write because of that, I believe. So it's very, very interesting, but I think those are some good insights into my own psychology, and we'll see if I can make those useful or pay off in any way, but we'll see, because I love stories, and I almost feel like as I get healthier, reading more, which is weird. I've never not felt like reading a lot. I read every day, but it's interesting in that I feel, in general, I feel resistance to the reading. I feel like writing. I feel like doing something else. So we'll see if that's something that I can work through. I mean, obviously, authors, that's what they do. And it puts me in a fairly good category, if you want to think about it that way. Douglas Adams, Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. It's famous. He missed every deadline ever constructed for him. He put off writing a ton, right? George R. R. Martin, same thing. Like, how long does the guy take to write a book? 5 years, 10 years, whatever. He takes a long time, and he writes other side projects as he's writing one book, and he's all over the place. So it doesn't put me in a bad category necessarily. But the productive authors definitely, I think, have a better chance of doing something, of making something. And Stephen King or James Patterson, Dean Koontz, these guys that crank out books, they're much more likely of becoming commercially successful. So we'll see exactly how I navigate that. I'm not exactly sure myself yet, and I don't particularly have a plan, but we'll see how I adapt to it. So a lot of good news in general. I mean, with the health stuff, I think I can overcome most of these other problems if I can get my health back. It's just a matter of having the ability health-wise of doing something, thinking clearly, of being able to think clearly, of having the energy to do things, the strength, and at least limited pain. That's a good thing to limit. So stretching and chiropractic adjustments are I think my way out of this, and then hopefully I can at some point maybe turn it almost all the way over to stretching and handle it on my own. We'll see if that's a real possibility or not, but I'm happy with the way it's going so far. Until next time,